The UDRcast is not affiliated and does not represent any 12-step fellowship. I, Bill Ward, the host of the UDRcast, will be sharing my experience and my journey of recovery. That does include, but is not limited to, the literature contained in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 Steps. Our guests will be sharing their own path to recovery and what has worked for them. The UDRcast encourages and supports all paths to recovery. Welcome everybody to the UDRcast. UDR stands for Uncover, Discover, and Recover. My name is Bill Ward, and I'm coming to you from the recovery capital of Canada, Calgary, Alberta. Here we are going to discuss everything recovery, different perspectives, different experiences, both with the people I know and with others from around the world. If you resonate with anything you've heard on this episode today, we ask that you share it with anyone who you think may benefit from it. If you have any questions or comments, please find us at BILLWARDLIFE and send us a message in the info section. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. If you are interested in more recovery content, you can find the buttons for the YouTube channel and other social media outlets on the homepage, and you will be redirected to those platforms. We can recover, one person, one family, one community at a time. Welcome everybody to the UDRcast. So today I have a friend that I've met from Instagram, slowly becoming friends, some interaction and some really good conversations last week over the telephone, which really blew my mind. We have Josh S. from Maine, and he's an alcoholic, ex-porn addict, ex-alcoholic, anything really, like we all are kinda, as we're trying to work on this path of recovery. Josh, so really awesome to have you here. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about where you're at and where you've come from, and then we'll get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me today, Bill. I appreciate you letting me tell my story to your listeners. My story is one that, is not that unique. It's pretty textbook when it comes to addiction. When it comes to the porn addiction, I am, the abused kid who becomes a porn addict. Dr. Patrick Carnes, who is kind of the godfather in this area, he once had a study. Even before the internet started, where he was looking at sex and porn addiction. And he found that just over 70% of men experienced some kind of physical abuse in their life. About 80% suffered some kind of sexual abuse, and over 90% suffered some kind of emotional or mental abuse. That led to unresolved trauma, and that unresolved trauma, as it so often does, when it's not handled properly, leads to addiction. Now, I was with a babysitter from ages like 2 to 7, 2 to 8. There was a lot of mental emotional cruelty. There was an extended period of sexual abuse and sexual inappropriateness. I got away from that place at 7 or 8, but I think it stuck with me. I found the answer at 12 years old when my older cousin introduced me to hardcore pornography. I can't tell you what I saw on the page. I can't tell you the name of the magazine, but I remember the warm feeling that came over me. Even at 12 years old, I remember thinking, I have just discovered some secret to life here. This is going to stick with me. This is something I have discovered that can make me feel good whenever I want. And 2 years later, and this is for people who still are on the fence, although, thankfully they're coming off, but people who are still on the fence about porn addiction being real, I can tell you it's real because 2 years later, I got drunk for the first time, 14 years old at a wedding. They kind of ignored all the tables that nobody was drinking their champagne at. When everybody was dancing, 14-year-old Josh walked around and started drinking. And after I started to get drunk, it was like, oh, this is why people do this. I feel better looking and I'm a better dancer and I'm funnier. And I just feel overall great. And at that, it was the exact same warm feeling that came over me 2 years earlier with the pornography. So really from that point forward, 14, 15 years old, whether I was in high school or college or, in my professional life, whether I was dating somebody or not, or married, which I now have been for the last 18 years, no matter what happened up until 7 years ago when I got sober, I always had pornography. I always had alcohol. They were my crutches. They were my go-tos. Instead of dealing with the trauma that was in my life, instead of even, I think, even recognizing that there was a lot of trauma that needed to be resolved. I knew bad stuff happened to me, but I didn't really understand the scarring of it. I just lived my life. And then everything did come, imploding in on itself. I couldn't handle things anymore. And I ended up 7 years ago going to alcohol rehab first. I thought that I'd only be there 4 weeks, like you see in the movies. I ended up being there 10 weeks. And then I started getting a lot of therapy when I returned home and started to do the deep dive. About a year later, I made a trip to a sex and porn rehab. Despite the fact that I hadn't looked at porn in over a year, I needed to do more deep, intensive work. So I went off to Texas at that point, and I was at a inpatient facility there for about 7 weeks. So these 17 weeks of rehab over the course of about a year were absolutely transformative to me and absolutely helped me understand how I became the way I did. Now, during this time, I created a journalism career for myself. I was a newspaper reporter. I was a magazine reporter. And I eventually got to the point that I owned my own magazine company here in Maine. We put out 3 titles, including one very popular lifestyle magazine that kind of covered the arts and dining and all that in Maine. And that kind of thrust me into being a bit of a local celebrity. So I started a film festival that over 4 or 5 years became internationally recognized. We had celebrities coming in. It turned into kind of a big deal. I also, for a couple years, was a local politician. I thought that maybe I could help things. Or that's what I told people. Looking back, I think I just wondered if I could win a popularity contest. And as I've mentioned to you before we recorded, it didn't fit. Round hole, square peg. I don't have the personality and the mindset to thrive in a government level. I need to be in control. I don't like committees. I don't like people who are trying to tell me my business when I know it, because I'm not the kind of person who tells you your business when I don't know it. So that was frustrating. And after 2 years, I pulled myself out of that. Um, like I said, my business started to hit the rocks. That kind of freaked me out, like nothing else ever had, except being at that babysitter's house. So I started to get some flashbacks. I started drinking heavier. I got off my bipolar medication that I'd been on for almost 20 years at that point. That had a negative effect. I stopped sleeping. The porn use got worse. The drinking got worse. And eventually, massive intervention, which, was thankfully the thing that forced me into that first rehab. And after about a week at that first rehab, it clicked. I was just there to put in my time and nod along and play the game, but it clicked. I was exactly the alcoholic they were talking about. I opened myself to the experience, which I thank God so much that I did that, because it really changed my life, or it started changing my life. And then since then, I have written 3 books, all themed pornography based, but all very different. My first book was a bit of a biography, or autobiography, I should say. My second book was geared towards the partners of pornography addicts who suffer betrayal trauma. And my third book was more of a journalistic look at what happened on the internet when it came to online pornography during the first several months of the pandemic, because we probably packed 5 or 6 years worth of changes into 3 months. And I thought somebody should at least make a record of it. So I did that. I used to go around to churches and libraries and colleges and talk about this stuff. The pandemic has killed that. I don't know when I'm going to be able to get get back to doing that. Hopefully, maybe this fall, maybe it'll be later. But I have become a certified coach with betrayal trauma. And because of my experience and research with pornography addiction, I also coach porn addicts. That's what I spend the bulk of my time doing now, is coaching either porn addicts or their partners, usually women. But I coach their partners who are dealing with a lot of deep emotional stuff from discovering that their partner was a porn addict, and the emotional fallout that comes from that. And then, one day a guy named Bill asked me to come on his podcast, and here I am.
And here you are. That was a
Yeah.
fucking great description of kind of where you started and where you're at now. I want to take you back to 12 years old for a minute here. Like, I work with a lot of addicts and alcoholics, and this porn addiction thing, it's pretty big, man. And what I've noticed about working with others is it's an area they don't really want to be fully forthright in. They may mention that they watch it a little bit, but as I get to know them, I can see it's really problematic. And from what I've studied and learned about porn addiction, which is very little, but there's a deep wiring in the psyche with this control and obsession thing that we see on the screen, and it really wires into the human being. And it's one of the hardest things to shake as far as behaviors, because as I work with addicts, alcoholics, I'm trying to like recalibrate and get them to have a psychic change, which means a new way of thinking. And this one has grooved itself in such a deep way that it takes a lot of time, a lot of patience, a lot of persistency and consistency. And the guys that stay consistent and persistent, I've actually seen a lot of growth in them.
Yep.
But in the same breath, let's go back to 12 years old and like describe for the men and ladies who, because porn's big now, right? Like how it kind of progressed as you're 12 years old. Was there shame behind it? Were you hiding it? Or did you find other people that were right into it too? Like kind of describe and walk through those younger teenage years into maybe some older teenage years.
Yeah, we always had HBO at my house, and I had seen naked women in movies. I did recognize by 12 years old that my mom, very, very Catholic lady, very Catholic upbringing, she would freak out if a naked woman appeared on the screen. We had to change the channel immediately. You see a breast, you see a butt, change the channel immediately. But if, Rambo or Charles Bronson or something was on and somebody was getting, the crap shot out of them or beaten out of them, it was okay to watch. So there was clearly something off about the sexuality in my home, or not off, but just it was a taboo thing. And then when I was at this babysitter's house, sex was much more open. Sex was much more on display. Sexual attitudes, openness to it, and including unhealthy practices. And I didn't feel safe at that house. Yet at my parents' house, I felt totally safe, yet sex, nudity, all of this was a bad thing. So I got very mixed messages when I was a kid about this, to the point where I recognized immediately that I had to hide it from day one. I had to hide this. When my cousin, he was probably 14 or 15, when he's obviously hiding this stuff, these magazines to show me, it was clear this was not something we shared with others. I didn't have much access to porn, I'd say, over the next year or two. It was when I started high school and I would ride my bike. It was about 2 miles away. I would ride my bike home from high school the first year and a half or so before I got a license. And I love movies. I've always loved movies. That's why I started a film festival. I would stop, and I'm sure you remember this, but some of the kids listening may not. I would stop at a mom and pop video store that was along my way home. And this was just as Blockbuster and Movie Gallery and these big places were starting to put mom and pops out of business. So they really didn't care what you rented. As long as you weren't renting at Blockbuster and putting them out of business, they didn't care. So one day I went in there a lot after school, but one day I saw the back room with the swinging saloon doors, and I said, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna try this. They let me rent R-rated movies. Why wouldn't they let me rent an X-rated movie? So I went to, I even think like I went underneath that door so they wouldn't hear the creaking. And I just grabbed two movies. They had these binders full of covers and they just had movies on the shelf. So I like found two numbers quickly, grabbed the films, and then I went to the front desk, probably mixed in a couple of regular movies in hopes that they wouldn't notice, like, a guy buying condoms or a Playboy, and always, throwing gum and a soda in there as well. And they didn't care. They didn't say a word. And the next day I went back and I was able to get more. Around this time also was when I got drunk for the first time and it felt great. There was a small convenience store, which was also on my way home, right near this place where I could go in and buy beer. And I would walk in there, and I don't know why my messed up 14-year-old thinking, but I never took a six pack. I'd always just grab three or four bottles out of the cooler and bring them up to the front. Like that was not as bad as a six pack or something. But these people also didn't care whatsoever that I was clearly underage. So they would sell me beer. So there I am, 14 years old, freshman in high school, riding my bike home, hearing clinking in my backpack because I've got three or four beers. I've got a couple porno movies. I would go home before my parents got home from work. They got home, between 5 and 6, like most of our parents did. And by that point, I had already looked at one of the porno movies. I had already drank a couple of the beers. And then I would, live my life that night. And my parents went to bed. My brother went to bed. And I had a TV in my room. So I would pop in the other porno movie. I would drink the other beer. And that's really what I did the first several years that I was into both porn and alcohol. Even when I had girlfriends in high school, I was sexually active from 15 years old forward. Even despite that, I still had these two things because, especially with the porn, like I said, I was an addict from day one. It was immediate. And there's no point in my life, whether it was 15 years old or 35 years old, that I confused actual sex with pornography. I've always enjoyed having sex. It's a very different thing than porn, satisfying myself to pornography. It served a different, different emotion, different piece of my mind. So I was always some guys, aren't don't keep the two separate, but I was very much able to, and I think that's part of how I was able to hide it from people, or especially female partners, for so long, is that you couldn't tell based on my sex life that I had an issue with this stuff at all. I didn't become some kind of pervert or crazy character who wanted to have, nut job orgies or anything, that you see in pornography. And I was very vanilla, very tame, despite the fact I might look at absolutely crazy pornography that was extreme. We are not the pornography we look at. And my sex life was very normal, very healthy. And it wasn't until all those years later, when things started to fall in and implode in my life, that I truly recognized there were issues. And honestly, I only thought it was alcohol. It wasn't until I was at my rehab and I met a certified sex addiction therapist that my caseworker wanted me to talk to, that I found out pornography addiction was a different addiction than the alcohol. I just thought it was a bad choice when I was drunk, but it was a different addiction, and it predated the drinking. And now, with years of recovery behind me, I'm at 7 years being sober from both now. With that much time behind me, I can look back and absolutely recognize that the pornography addiction probably ran a lot deeper emotionally and mentally than the alcohol. And it not even probably, it absolutely caused more problems in my life than the alcohol.
But at first, you thought that the alcoholism was the primary illness, and once you got rid of the alcoholism, you thought that the porn addiction would kind of subside. Is that correct?
Well, I didn't know porn addiction was a concept until I got to that first rehab. My history of drinking, I did a lot of dumb stuff when I was drunk. We could make a really long list of dumb stuff I did when I was drunk, and looking at porn excessively was just one of the things on the list. And I put it, at a same level as sending off mouthy emails or ignoring my responsibilities or whatever else I did when I was drunk. It wasn't until I met that specialist out in Palm Springs, California. He made me realize that, what happened to me when my business collapsed I took myself off the pills and I was starting to have memories of what happened when I was a kid. He was the one who said, hey, this is actually a separate addiction. And I knew sex addiction was something, but I didn't know that it extended to pornography. And he helped me understand that. He helped me unlock a lot of what happened at the babysitter's house. And he helped create a strategy for me that I was able to bring back home. And me being a journalist type, I did a lot. I tried to do as much research as I could. And there was so little out there for the average person about pornography addiction. That's when I decided to write my first book, kind of just detailing what happened to me, especially in the last several years of my addiction. Because while I can read, the New England Journal of Medicine, and I don't mind reading academic texts, I know the average person doesn't like to do that. To me, that's I understand it, but I can't understand a word of Shakespeare. And I know people read Shakespeare for fun, and I don't get it. But I recognize that I probably had the experience and had the skill set that I could put a book out about pornography addiction. So I did that. So the average guy could read it or the average girl could read it and it would make sense. And I thought that was the only thing I was ever going to do. I was just going to tell that story and then I was going to put a new life together. And when the book came out, it shocked me how many partners of porn addicts, 95% women, but how many partners or family members of porn addicts contacted me and said, hey, you got through this, your wife got through this, can you help us? Or do you have any advice? And it was from being hit with all of those that I ended up co-writing my second book specifically for the partners of porn addicts. And that book sold incredibly well. It still sells, quite a few copies every week. It's probably sold 10 times what my first and third book have. And that was when it was so obvious to me that it wasn't just porn addicts who were underserved, but even more underserved were the partners who were suffering this trauma that they didn't ask for, that they never saw coming, and that they so needed help with. So as the pandemic hit, I made the decision to go into that field, study more about betrayal trauma, and try and become a coach, because there aren't many out there, and there certainly aren't many out there who also have the experience of being the addict. So I can speak to a partner not only as an expert, not only as someone who has done a ton of research and reading and knows this, but I have the experience as well being an addict. I have the experience of being the, nasty gaslighter. I was the one who was the manipulator. And I can speak that language, and I can almost in a way translate from addict to normie for the normies and say, this is what's really going on. It doesn't excuse it. They need to get help. They're sick, but you are interpreting their illness in a way that is not correct. So let's get you on the same page with the illness, and then we'll talk about how to fix yourself in this. So that's kind of where that took off, and lo and behold, it turns out I'm pretty good at it, and I really enjoy it, and I like helping people one on one. And it pays decently, and I can sit at home, I can wear tie-dye all day, and I can try to help people. It's a pretty good gig. I wasn't supposed to be a magazine publisher. I wasn't supposed to be a film festival curator. I wasn't supposed to be a politician. I was supposed to help people with their trauma and with their addictions, because I've never felt more at home doing something than I do now with the coaching.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So we spoke last week on the phone, had a pretty good chat, and I'm a big book guy. My recovery started in the big book, and it's still the foundational piece of my recovery. Of course, I do my First Nations culture, which aligns with it perfectly. But one of the big things that I've learned about the book and about the illness of alcoholism, and when I say alcoholism or addiction, I don't mean the fucking substance. I
Right.
mean the all the behaviors, including the substance, because once I put the substances down, I still need that sense of ease and comfort. And in the doctor's opinion, this is like the basic premise of where the spiritual malady is. It talks about I'm restless, irritable, discontented. I'm not good inside.
Right.
There's a lot of things inside of me that I don't even know that I'm not really good with. And when I live like this, I get this restless, irritable, discontent. I'm not cool with me, but I don't really understand that as I'm living it. Unless, again, I can experience a sense of ease and comfort that comes at once by taking the first few drinks. But once the drinks and the drugs are gone, I will put anything in that alcoholic cycle, and it's going to be anger. And we talked last week. What I get from anger is I get a sense of power and I get a sense of control, and it makes me feel like really good while I'm on it. And I go into the spree of it. And before I go into the spree, I actually don't have a choice in going in anger, because it just kind of comes up. And the book says, as we succumb to the desire again for the drink or the drugs, well, I succumb to the desire again for anger because I don't even know it. Or porn, right? Or gambling, or relationship hopping, like relationships, period. And the power and control that somebody gets about seeking a relationship. Which is why a lot of these guys that I've seen, the relationships don't last because the shine wears off, and the initial chase was where they got that fucking ease and comfort, but it doesn't last. And it's the same with porn. Like, you get the power, you get the control, but it never lasts. And it actually makes you feel worse about yourself as you come out of the cycle. But then you need it again, and you don't really have a choice because we're powerless over it, right? So I think the biggest thing to medicate here is the spiritual malady. I've always said that. And the only way to really medicate the spiritual malady is to look at what and who you really fucking are, looking at the patterns, looking at the inventory of your life, and really fucking getting honest with yourself. But pride doesn't really like it either, right? Pride doesn't like admitting some of these things that aren't socially acceptable. And until you actually admit some of these things, like I had to when I was a drug addict, I couldn't work towards the correction, right? So what's your take on the spiritual malady is kind of at the root of all of these self-destructive behaviors, and then the inventory and kind of growing out of it from there? What's your experience with that?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true, because hopefully you come to recognize it, as you and I both did, but something inside is broken. And it's not a physical brokenness. It's not that you have a bad lung or you have diabetes or something like that. So if it's not like that, where is it? It's in your mind. In my opinion, that's where our soul lives. I know it lives in our heart, but it lives in our Valentine heart. It doesn't live in our artery and ventricles beating heart. It lives in our mind. That's where addiction lives. And I tell people, sex addiction, porn addiction, it doesn't take place in the crotch. It takes place between the ears. Gambling addiction doesn't take place in the wallet. It takes place between the ears. Heroin addiction doesn't take place, in a pipe. It takes place between the ears. And 95% of addiction is exactly the same. There are obviously different side effects. You can mess yourself up much quicker with heroin than you can with, pornography or gambling, because of the physical side effects. But what's going on in the mind is basically the same. And when I sit down with a new client, what I tell them is usually that, we are going to, they sit down there, I got to stop looking at porn. It's like, well, I mean, I can easily get you to stop looking at porn. All I have to do is help you develop another addiction and you'll get off of it. But that's not going to help anything. I don't think that, playing Red Dead Redemption or, any Xbox game 12 hours a day is really going to do anything for you except, maybe help with some of the calluses in your hands that you developed as a porn addict. But I tell people it's really going to be 25% managing triggers. It's about, how do you not look at it in the moment? How do you not let it consume you? How do you analyze what's happening around you so you don't end up in that trap? But 75% of the coaching is just figuring out how you became the person you did. And, I had a session that ended right before you and I started this podcast. And this gentleman and I, he was actually infidelity. He wasn't pornography. But he and I today just talked about his father and his relationship with his father between about 8 and 15 years old. That had nothing to do with the wife he cheated on. That had nothing to do with the cheating. We barely talked about his mom. We just talked about his dad because we need to figure out, this was his first and theoretically most important male role model, and this was obvious, this was his father figure because it was his father, and it was important to do a deep dive on that so we could talk about this guy and this relationship. And we did that for an hour. And next week we're going to talk about mom, and the week after that we're going to talk about siblings, and then maybe the week after that we can talk about certain connections to how he is now. But just sitting there, when was the last time you talked about your mom, your father, and your siblings for 3 straight hours? Just about what happened to you growing up. Something as simple as that can unlock so many doors in the mind. And not just unlock doors, but I always describe the recovery process as I have always had a puzzle in a box, and I've always tried to keep the pieces separate. I have my professional life, my personal life, my close family, my extended family. Everybody saw different versions of me, and I lived a life of different versions. And I tried to compartmentalize and basically have little piles of puzzle pieces here and there and keep them separate because it was easier that way. Well, the truth is, with recovery, what you need to do is take those piles, throw them together, and you recognize, gee, my educational upbringing has a lot to do with, how I feel about X, Y, or Z. Or when my mom left my dad for 1 month, that had a big, profound influence on me, despite the fact I was 6, despite the fact they were back together a month later, despite the fact that, there was never any talk of this moving forward, and they are the happiest people on earth now. That did leave a mark, but I didn't even remember it until I started talking about it. And that's like, oh, I have issues with my wife leaving, or the potential of my wife leaving, because my mom left. And I know that you can leave, and I know you can come back, but I also know you can leave. And I saw this, and I think that left a mark. Now, what does that have to do with pornography? I don't know, but it's an important thing for me to go through. It's an important thing to declutter my head and talk about. And there are a lot of things that perhaps I haven't drawn a direct line to pornography, or I haven't drawn a direct line to alcohol. And that's okay, because addiction is a symptom of a bigger problem. That bigger problem is trauma.
Josh, I want to jump in there for a second because you're hitting some fucking big points. Like I've worked directly one-on-one with close to 300, maybe more than 300 addicts, alcoholics, basically human beings. At the end of the day, these are human beings with desires, with emotions, with subconscious patterning. And I specialize in the addict alcoholic, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of psyche evaluation and learning, and you fucking nailed something really well. So I see a lot of addicts, alcoholics go do that step 5 process. And it's basically a confession that they read off a piece of paper. One of my best friends is also just like me, sponsored 300 plus guys. And we've compared data over the years. And one thing that we found is these step 5s that used to take me 2.5 hours to do and listen to somebody else's over the years, now they're never under 7 hours. They can be up to 15, 20, 30 hours. And where I always start is I start at the mom and the dad and the family, and let's talk about the grandparents and maybe even their grandparents. Let's really go and dig in. And like you said, what does it have to do with anything? Sometimes nothing. But sometimes there's a piece that links to this that you never would have thought, and they've never would have thought, because we compartmentalize things and we just think that life is like this over here and it used to be like that over here. But there's all these like links. It's kind of like a ball of yarn that kind of ties it all together. And simple as, a father and a mother having a disconnected relationship, although they had a decent life and they raised their kids okay, but the father was fucking indignant and maybe not invested in the family, and maybe the mom was domineering. And those things matter as we walk through the rest of their lives. Another thing that I've noticed is younger guys that might be 9 or 10 hanging out with older guys that, that was who they had to hang out with. Like they're hanging out with 15 or 18-year-old guys. Their viewpoints on women are so different because they objectify them, because a typical 18-year-old guy just wants to get laid. So, without the proper father figure, like there's so many things that are so important in a listener for a 5, and then being able to transmit that information and like open these little portals. That's where your experience of life is so important. And that's probably what makes you a beautiful, awesome coach, is because you understand what you're looking for and you're intuitive. And sometimes you don't even know what you're looking for, but your little spidey senses go, fuck, okay, this is tying to this. And then you talk about it. And sometimes it's not even like a big ticket item, but there's so much healing in the process, right? And so after saying all that, I see a lot of people in recovery that get to a point maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 years in where they get really fucked up. And they've never really dealt with the stuff that's deep down inside. And I always say, if you don't have a clean house and you've done some of this house cleaning processes properly, the shit that's way down deep inside, it's still coming out as you stay sober and as you get older. And if you haven't learned how to like look for it and deal with it, that shit will fucking deal with you. So I see a lot of people, committing suicide, picking the drink and the drug back up, fucking abandoning, good lives. Like there's many ramifications that come from not understanding some of the depth of what you're talking about. What's your experience with seeing what I'm talking about as well?
Oh, no, you're absolutely right. And I'll tell you, when it comes to 12 steps, I did Alcoholics Anonymous the entire time that I was out at rehab in California. And that was the Palm Springs area, which that part of the country is just amazing for recovery. When it comes to, I don't know what it is about the desert air or the sunshine or what it is, but it's a hotbed for it and it's a great place for it. I don't know if I could have recovered anywhere else. But when I got back to Maine, the AA meetings were very different. I don't know if it's the ruralness. I don't know if it's coming from the Southwest to the Northeast. I did not enjoy the meetings whatsoever. And the same thing happened to me the following year when I went to the porn and sex rehab. I did Sex Addicts Anonymous, and I actually did Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, SAA and SLAA, in the Dallas area. And I loved those meetings too. Such a diverse group of people, sharing their stories, supporting each other, hanging out afterwards, and it was great. I felt supported. I came back to Maine, and again, it was a different story. In Dallas, there were probably 3 or 4 SAA meetings every day. In Maine, the last time I checked, there were 5 SAA meetings in the entire week. And we're not a small state. There was one that was in my town, but the next closest was 40, 45 miles away. And I'm not going to drive that at 7 or 8 at night, back and forth, an hour each way to go to a 1 hour meeting, um, especially when I had other things to do. I did that for a little while, and I always went to the one in my town for probably 6, 7 months. There was no SLAA in Maine at the time. But what I found was that this was a group of men. There were no women in the program. This was a group of men that mostly were just complaining about their wives and who kind of were pissed off that they couldn't have some sexual Caligula, lifestyle going on that, would make the cast of Game of Thrones blush, like they always thought they would when they were teenage guys. And now they're just, middle class white dudes who are bored and have boring sex lives, and they either got caught with porn or they got caught having an affair. They don't understand what they did wrong. They don't want to go deep at all and learn why they made these decisions or how they got there. I don't think most of them are even addicts. If you truly drove it home, I think most were there under the rule of their partner being told they have to go to it, or something bad would happen. And after I did that for so many months, I just decided that, I've read the green book, and in AA it's blue, and in SAA it's green. I read the green book. I got more from AA than I got from SAA. But after a while, it just became that my personality type, I think I got what I was going to get out of those programs. I wish I was still in bigger cities. I think that I may still be part of the programs, but here in rural Maine, where people tend to be a lot more conservative than I am, people tend to be a lot more judgmental than I am. Uh, it never quite connected. But you're right. You cannot deal with just the addiction. I tell people that's like the addiction is like a Band-Aid, and your trauma is like a giant wound. You can put Band-Aids on your wounds for years and hide them and manage, but you're not taking care of the wound. It's only when you go and deal with the wound that you actually heal. And then it gets to the point you don't need the Band-Aids. Whether it's, in AA here in Maine, I saw some people who have been white knuckling it for 20, 25 years. Their life, they don't drink anymore, but their life is so much more about alcohol now than it even was back then. And I just don't see that as a quality lifestyle, because I think if they would get away with it, if they didn't have to deal with their own conscience, I think they would still be drinking. And me being around those kind of people, for my personality type, is not great because I don't suffer fools well. I don't accept BS very well. I think that's also what makes me a good coach, is that I think like most addicts, I have less of a tolerance for addicts than a lot of people, because I know what is us making excuses, what is us being lazy, and then what is actually real. And the rooms of the 12-step groups in Maine were not good for me because they would not look at the other side of things.
Yeah, dude. I fucking relate to all of that. I've went to fellowship meetings across Canada, and some places I'm like, what the fuck is actually happening here? But around our area, like I call Calgary the recovery capital of Canada. The 12 steps and the actual directions and the real message is really strong here. And like I'm a huge proponent of the real message that's in there that has nothing to do with the substance. It's the spiritual malady. I've been able to express what the literature is saying in big book studies and groups and meetings that I go to. And, And this ripple effect is happening in the fellowships here. Although there's pockets where it's still pretty weak, but in general, I think the fellowship in general around the world, from what I've seen and can tell, it's watered down with that drop of dye that kind of spreads in the water with the wrong message. It's about the substance, and it's a lot of people bitching and complaining. But I'm just here to do my part and be the change that I want to see in the world, and I'm on the same page as you. I am going to stay in the fellowship, but I align it with my culture. But something what I wanted to talk to you about is we talk about this epidemic of porn that's kind of on the surface that nobody really wants to talk about. But you had mentioned something really interesting last week. There's another arm of this illness that's kind of working itself out there that nobody's talking about too. And that is the creators of the content of porn. And you had mentioned something really interesting that day too, where the women and the men, I'm sure, who create this product that's just getting eaten up like fucking crazy, they get a sense of validation and love, and it's kind of perpetuating its own sickness in the spiritual malady in a way that we didn't really think, right? Can you kind of elaborate to the listeners on, yes, the porn addiction is a problem, but what about the creators' addiction to this as well?
Right. Well, let's look at the porn industry going from, the mid 90s backward. What was it? It was mostly movie houses or videotapes towards the end that you could buy. The porn industry pushed itself to a straight white male audience for the most part. And that's what it was. And you've got to, I don't know how many film companies there were at the time. I don't know exactly how many actors or actresses there were at the time, but you got to figure it was such a lower number that nobody, and it was porn, so it was taboo. So nobody really studied it back then. I don't know how many porn stars there were in 1995, maybe 2,000, maybe 3,000. I don't know. But what's happened with the internet and what happened especially with the pandemic. Now, there have been cam sites around since before the pandemic where a man or a woman will broadcast from their home and you can, pay them money and they'll do different things. But we saw this absolutely explode at the beginning of the pandemic. The website that most of these people use called OnlyFans, which it's funny, just about every person under 40 years old knows what OnlyFans is, and it's a regular part of the youth culture. And people over 40 years old never heard of it. It's the strangest gulf in America to me right now, that there's this one thing that is top of mind with a lot of people and nobody else has heard of it. But for those who haven't heard of it, essentially with OnlyFans, it's kind of like Etsy meets Facebook in that you can charge someone to look at your profile, look at your page. You can put up photos or videos of anything you want. It has, obviously, it's R and X-rated content in most cases for these men and women. And somebody pays a subscription to look at your page, and then you can also have other videos and other photos that you charge additional for. So the pandemic comes on January 1st, 2020, before the pandemic grabbed hold. There were about 300,000 content creators on OnlyFans who were making, not all of them make pornography, but the vast majority make sexual content or pornography. 300,000 people. By January 1st, 2021, this year, there was estimated creators on OnlyFans between 1.3 and 1.5 million. So what that means is just this one site during the pandemic, between 1 million and 1.2 million people worldwide joined this website so they could make pornography in the I don't know what the word would be, I guess, in the comfort of their own home, in the secrecy and the whatever of their own home. And who was it? Well, it was the people who were laid off. Think about who works in our service industries. We closed every restaurant. Well, where did the waitresses go? Where did the waiters go? Where did the bartenders go? Where did the hostess and hosts go? Well, most of them are good-looking young people who have customer service skills. And instead of making $13 an hour folding clothes at the Gap, it turned out they could make $130 an hour showing pictures of their ass. And it doesn't take, a math whiz to understand, well, gee, there's a lot more money here. And the thing is, this group, 30 years old and younger, they don't know a world before the internet. So they have always had unfettered access to pornography. I don't care what their parents threw up as far as blocks or anything like that. And not just pornography of, a guy and a girl having sex. They can find anything they want out there. I mean, you want a woman having sex with a horse while three black guys ride the horse and two midgets throw fish sticks at them while Irish music is playing. I promise you that's on the internet somewhere. So that's what these people have had to look at. And the thing is, that drops taboos that you and I may have about sexuality, taboos that you and I may have about pornography, the youngest generation doesn't have. So whereas, our brothers and sisters or, our friends would have been, oh my God, I couldn't imagine going on the internet and showing, my parts. Well, keep in mind, when you and I were in high school, there was no Instagram. If there was a picture of the sexy head cheerleader in her bikini, it would have been passed around like it was, it was a joint. It would have been passed around like it was actual currency to view. But today, what have these kids grown up with? They've grown up with Instagram. And if you're a 16 or 17-year-old guy or girl, there's probably a photo of you in a skimpy bathing suit, likely a thong if you're a girl. And there's probably, if you're a guy and you have anything of an okay body, there's probably a photo of you wearing, just boxer shorts or something on there. So these kids are getting sexualized and these kids are getting conditioned to take these nearly nude photos 15, 16 years old. I mean, some obviously go further. And what happens is that they just become desensitized. And really, what's the difference? What's the big difference between wearing a bra, wearing a bikini top, and wearing nothing at all? Well, there's a lot of women who don't see that much of a difference, or it's not that big of a difference that it's going to affect their lives, especially if they're on the other end of a computer, safe at home. So these people who were our service workers, they moved on to OnlyFans. They made great money. They didn't go back to the service world. This is why you drive by restaurants and they're begging for people to work there. This is why you can't, I know that, there's the whole getting on unemployment thing, but those benefits when you and I are recording are set to disappear in about a month and a half. You're not going to see a lot of younger people run back to the service industry world because so many of them are making money on OnlyFans. Now, that would be one thing if they just wanted to make money and then they return to their normal life. But my third book, which I mentioned was, a bit of a journalistic look at the online pornography world during the early days of the pandemic, I interviewed a lot of the men and women who use OnlyFans. And yes, there were some who had been there a long time, viewed it as a business. It was their job. There were some who got there and were like, I just need to feed my kid and keep a roof over my head. I can do it with this. When things change, I'm going to go back to it. This is a momentary thing. And then there were men and women, usually younger, 18, 19, 20, who discovered something there that they didn't know was there and that was missing in their lives. For instance, one of the women I talked to, I think she was 18, 19 years old, she talked about how she had never been on a real date with a guy. She couldn't get a guy to ask her out. She never knew what she was doing wrong. Now she's got guys who are throwing themselves at her. She's got guys who, want to give her money to go on trips with them. I talked to another woman who, has said that she's never done well with relationships. She's had multiple proposals for marriage. That there's one guy who will pay her $100 for unique photos of her that he sends to only her. And that makes her feel super special. And I interview these people again and again and again. I keep hearing it's not just about the money. This makes me feel good. This makes me feel special. This makes me feel like I'm good at something. What's happening inside of them is the same dopamine effect that's happening inside somebody who looks at pornography, especially one who's an addict. And what I fear after hearing this again and again, what I fear is that the long-term legacy of the pandemic is going to not be about the people who watched a lot of extra porn because they were stuck at home. It's going to be about the people who made it, because I think many of these people have become addicted to making pornography. It makes them feel good. It gives them control. Whatever demons of rejection and being, I don't know, walked out on by their parents or their loved ones. Well, they've met new parents and loved ones and brothers and sisters and boyfriends and girlfriends online, and they're giving them what they need. And it's sad because I have a feeling that 20, 25 years from now, some of these men and women who are 25 now, they're going to be 50 years old taking their clothes off online, probably making less money than they are now, but they won't be able to stop because that is serving the demon in their head that is addiction. I think that, when we look back on pornography, we look at the pornography use during the pandemic, 20, 30 years from now, when we do have the ability to study this over the past few decades, I think we're going to find out that the real damage was in making pornography.
Amazing, bro. So for me, when I work with myself on whatever self-destructive behaviors I've had, and porn being one that hasn't been at the top of the list, of course, I've viewed it and
Well,
dabble in it, but it's never taken my life in a really terrible direction. It's never caused me any issues in relationships, but a lot of the guys that I've worked with, it has. But it doesn't really matter what the behavior is. So for me, I always focus on, let's put whatever's causing me restless, irritable, discontented, whatever behaviors, whatever thoughts, ideas, emotions in the program, I've learned, let's focus it on God. Let's focus it on Creator. Let's focus it on the spirit of the universe, whatever. And I've seen nothing but phenomenal results of using this power. And I know we spoke earlier, you're of a little bit of a different school. So for me, I really go towards that. What do you go towards when you work with people?
I go towards the idea that, number one, they are a sentient being. They know right from wrong. They know the right thing to do. They are a lot smarter than they want to admit. They are a lot less lazy than they want to admit. That it's not hard to be the person they want to be, but something is holding them back. That's the ultimate thing, number one. I don't tell them that they need God or religion or spirituality, but I do say if they have it, that's only going to help them, because I've never really seen it hurt anybody. But I've also seen people who are agnostic, atheist, or don't even care recover. So there are some people out there in some of your more conservative religions who seem to push this narrative that you need to have a spiritual side to recover. That bothers me because it says to people who aren't, they can't. And I don't like that. I think it helps. And I think that going through the recovery process, like I did, you actually get more in tune with your spirituality. I was raised Catholic. I was raised kicking and screaming, forced to go to church every weekend Catholic. I was that inquisitive, pain in the ass 10-year-old who was, hey, so Cain and Abel, how did people come after that? If it was two brothers, was it some kind of miracle incest that caused the world to populate? And people would look at me as a 10-year-old and go, okay, thank you. You don't have any answers for me. And that was my relationship with the Catholic Church. It just didn't. And there were so many hypocrites there. My feeling is, if you are going to follow a religion, you should subscribe to 99% of their beliefs. And I had no problem with gay people. I have no problem with birth control. I didn't have a lot of problems with a lot of things they did have problems with. So I when I was old enough, after my confirmation, I walked away from it, and I never really thought about it again. Didn't go to a church unless it was a wedding or a funeral. But when I was writing my first book, I was able to tap into how often I actually used my spiritual side. I made a joke earlier to you before we started that I recognized I was just allergic to the G word, and that word was God. I always used the phrase the universe. And because it didn't come with church on Sunday or a Bible, I didn't really think it was religion. I didn't even think about it as spirituality. But in retrospect, I can look back on my life, and no matter how bad it was, I'm actually one of the most faith-filled people that I know. I always, I know everything's happening for a reason. I know things work out the way they're supposed to. I know I'm going to be okay. Even if I'm, killed by farm equipment right after our interview here, it's going to be okay. Life, the world went on before I got here. The world will go on after I leave. Hopefully, I helped some people along the way, made their lives a little better, but they'll be dead too someday. And none of us will be remembered. So while you're here, try to do good, try to be nice. And you know what? If you want, need, choose to have a higher power, to believe that in this universe there is something bigger than all of us, I think that's totally cool. And I also think it makes sense, because I can't tell you how all this got here. But when I'm dealing with people in coaching, when I'm dealing with helping them get through things, even if they are very religious or they are very spiritual, I don't make that a centerpiece of it, because a lot of addiction is about the science, a lot of addiction is about the math, a lot of addiction is about going through a process, and everybody has their own journey. Mine was 12 steps for a while. Mine was more about going out and advocating and talking and giving back that way. Sitting here right now with you, I am exercising my recovery. This is how I do this. I talk about it. I share my story. I've done 300 podcasts or interviews. I share my story again and again and again to try to help other people. That's my way of doing things. And I think that we have to respect everybody's way of doing things. If you want to do it with God and Jesus to your left and right, fantastic. If you want to do it with nothing and nobody to your left or right, fantastic. It's just going to help you a lot more if you do have some of that bigger picture and belief in bigger things.
Awesome. So we got a little bit more time here. I just wanted to maybe get your take on, for anybody out there, man or woman, who is struggling with whatever it is they're struggling with. Maybe it's porn, maybe it's alcohol, drugs, maybe it's relationship addiction, validation through the opposite sex or whatever. What's your recommendation on somebody who struggles but doesn't know what to do? What would you say to somebody out there?
Find somebody. Much like the 12-step sponsor program, and that's kind of regimented. It's got a template to follow. But I truly believe finding somebody who has been there is the most important thing, and somebody who has succeeded at recovery, because it helps you put a face on it. It helps you be able to ask individual questions. It helps you see success as possible. It helps having somebody who's been there and knows it and isn't going to judge you. Probably the most powerful moment I have in coaching is if I am talking to a male porn addict, and they recognize in the first 15 minutes of talking to me that I don't care what they looked at, because I know we are not the pornography that we look at. I have looked at some crazy stuff. I don't ever want anybody to pee on me, But I would be lying to you if I said I never saw pornography of people peeing on each other. I have. I've seen just about everything you can see because I was a porn addict for 22 years. I don't care what you looked at. I probably looked at it. I probably looked at worse, but it doesn't mean that's who you are. This was your medication. This was your habit. This was your little bugaboo that you had to go to. And I don't care if watching grannies in diapers or watching, you're a guy and you're watching five guys go at it, but you tell me you're not gay. That's fine. I don't think that has anything to do with you being gay. It has to do with serving the master in your mind. And sometimes when you've been there a long time, you need the regular stuff doesn't do it for you. You have to find something that does do it for you. And so when these guys discover that I know this, I've been there, I don't care what they looked at. I'm not going to judge them. I'm not going to shame them or embarrass them. You looked at porn. 80% of guys under 50 look at porn once a month. 60% of women under 50 look at porn once a month. Looking at porn is an average, normal thing. It sucks that you became an addict, but we know how to deal with addiction these days, and we can. I dealt with addiction. I'm much better. I can introduce you to 100 people who were porn or sex addicts and are now doing better. It's not an anomaly. You're not special. You're not the one who can't be cured or recovered. If you go through the program, if you do the work, you can get better. Anybody can get better. I truly believe, unless you've got some kind of mental or physical thing that just blocks your way. Ultimately, I think that if you have somebody who is a role model who has been through this, that's the best thing. Now, they may urge you, they may hear your story and say, oh, you need to talk to a coach or a therapist, or they may hear your story and say, 12 steps is the best thing for you. But they can help you. They can help you figure out the next step. If that next step is a professional, well, then you just go and you create a strategy with them. That's a lot of what I do with guys. Some guys, I only talk to them 4 or 5 times. Some I talk to every week, for months and months on end. But some guys just need a strategy, just need a path, and know that I'm here. Everybody is so different. It's like I said with my last answer. There is no, you have to recover my way. You have to recover this way, or it doesn't count. I find that just about everybody needs fellowship. Everybody needs a shoulder to lean on. Everybody needs a role model, and start with that role model.
Awesome, my brother, and I couldn't agree more. Everybody needs a mentor. Everybody needs fellowship. Everybody needs to be able to connect to somebody who has been there and done it and is successful in moving forward in their life and giving hope and lending out the hand. That's awesome. So yeah, we're gonna wrap this up, Josh. I really, really appreciate you being here today. I know I could sit here and talk for another fucking 2, 3, 4, 5 hours about a number of different things, and I'm really lit up that I've met you. Where can people find you that might want to reach out to you and find some of your content and read your books?
Yeah.
And what are the names of the books? Tell us where they can find you and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. You can find my books anywhere online. You buy books, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. There are links on my website. My books, the first book, which is the autobiography, that's called The Addiction Nobody Will Talk About. The book for partners is called He's a Porn Addict, Now What? And the most recent book is called appropriately Porn in the Pandemic, how 3 months changed, 3 months in 2020 changed everything. And you can see articles I've written on my website. You can get links to resources on my website. If you want to learn about my coaching, details of that are also on the website. That is paddictrecovery.com. If you want to find me on Instagram or Twitter, that is also just the letter P, Addict Recovery. I don't have Facebook because I don't care who you voted for. And if you have any questions, drop me a line, paddictrecovery@gmail.com. It's easy to remember.
Right on, Josh. Thank you so much for coming and joining us up here in the recovery capital of Canada, Calgary, Alberta, even though we're via Zoom. Dude, let's stay in touch and let's keep doing what we do and helping our own people in our own way. And I'm really appreciative that I've met you, my friend, and I look forward to learning some more from you.
And thank you so much for having me, Bill. There were still a lot of people who this is too taboo. They don't want to talk about it. I have been invited to shows, and then right before, oh, I didn't realize, I didn't realize what we were really talking about. And I don't get to come on their shows. So I want to thank you for letting me on here. I want to thank you for tackling what is still taboo for a lot of people, despite the fact everybody's doing it. It's still taboo. I appreciate it. And again, if anybody out there needs help, no matter what your addiction, go get the help. Addiction doesn't end well unless you recover. So make that decision.
Thank you for tuning in to the UDRcast. We hope you have enjoyed this episode. The viewpoints and the opinions expressed today were solely of the individual sharing them. If you resonated with this episode, please follow us and share this link with anyone that may benefit from it. Please visit us at BILLWARDLIFE to see everything that we have going on. We can recover, one person, one family, one community at a time.